In a shocking display of cruelty, a ruthless biker heartlessly kicked a blind girl's dog purely for amusement, completely unaware that the renowned actor Keanu Reeves was quietly watching from the sidelines. This brutal act not only sent shockwaves of outrage through the community, but also sparked a powerful call for justice and compassion in an increasingly indifferent world. The cold metal of the gun pressed against Keanu's temple felt oddly comforting. His finger trembled on the trigger as the afternoon light filtered through the blinds, casting prison bar shadows across his living room floor. 38 years old, and this was where life had led him, contemplating an exit while surrounded by the artifacts of a seemingly successful existence. The framed law degree on the wall, photos of smiling faces at charity galas. His reflection in the darkened TV screen showed a stranger, hollow-eyed, unshaven, still wearing yesterday's dress. Shirt. "Dad?" Emily's voice from the other side of the apartment door shattered the silence. 3 soft knocks followed. "Dad, I know you're in there. Please open up." The gun wavered in his grip. His 16-year-old daughter wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be with her mother in Connecticut, safely distanced from the implosion of his life. Marcus slid the weapon under a sofa cushion and wiped his face with shaking hands. "Just a minute," he called, his voice betraying nothing of what she'd interrupted. The headline would break tomorrow morning. Or perhaps it already had. Prominent. Defense attorney Marcus Wells indicted in evidence, tampering scandal. His phone had been buzzing non-stop before he'd finally silenced it. Law partners, reporters, his ex-wife, all wanting answers he couldn't provide. Emma knocked again, more insistently. "Dad, there are reporters downstairs. Mom's freaking out. She's been calling you for hours." Marcus stood on unsteady legs and moved toward the door, catching glimpses of his apartment as if seeing it for the first time or the last. The half-empty glass of whiskey on the coffee table, the scattered papers from the case that had destroyed everything, the photo of Emma at her junior piano recital, smiling with a confidence he'd once possessed. He unlocked the door. Emma rushed in, her dark hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, her eyes, so like his own, wide with concern and something else. Fear. Disappointment. "What are you doing here?" he asked. Emma's gaze darted around the disheveled apartment, landing briefly on the sofa where the gun lay hidden. "Looking for my father," she said quietly. "Have you seen him?" Her words struck harder than any physical blow. Before he could respond, his phone lit up on the table. The caller ID showed Nora Winters, his law partner, former law partner, the woman whose case notes had put him in this position. Emma saw it too. "Are you going to answer it, or are you just going to keep hiding?" Marcus looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and realized with crushing clarity that she knew. Somehow she already knew everything. 6 months earlier, Marcus had been at the peak of his career. Wells and Winters had grown from a modest 2-person practice to one of Boston's most respected criminal defense firms. That Tuesday morning, the conference room hummed with the energy of a team poised for victory. "The prosecution has nothing but circumstantial evidence," Marcus announced to the assembled junior associates. "They've built their case on a theory, not facts." Behind him, the wall-mounted screens displayed photographs of Jackson Reed, their latest high-profile client. The tech entrepreneur stood accused of orchestrating a complex fraud scheme that had cost investors millions. The case had dominated local headlines for weeks. Nora Winters leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. At 45, she remained as sharp and formidable as when they'd met in law school. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her expression unreadable as she observed her partner's confidence. "Nothing except the email chain that places Reed at the center of everything," she reminded him when the associates had filed out. "If that evidence holds up in court, we're done." Marcus loosened his tie. "Then we make sure it doesn't hold up." That evening, they'd worked late in his office, takeout containers scattered between case files. The building had emptied hours ago. Outside his window, Boston's financial district glittered against the night sky. I can't find any procedural errors in how they obtained the emails, Nora said, frustration evident. The warrant was clean. Chain of custody is solid. Marcus stared at the ceiling, spinning a pen between his fingers. What if we had something that called Reed's involvement into question, something that creates reasonable doubt? Nora's expression shifted. What are you suggesting? He hadn't meant to cross the line, not really. It started as a hypothetical, a thought experiment. What if certain exculpatory emails existed that the prosecution hadn't discovered? What if those emails suggested Reed was being set up by his CFO? 20 years of friendship and professional respect stretched between them as they debated the ethics, then the technicalities. Marcus watched something change in Nora's eyes that night, a hardening perhaps, or a resignation. This isn't us, Marcus. This isn't what we built this firm to be. But Marcus couldn't let go. The Reed case had become personal, though he couldn't articulate why. Perhaps it was the way the prosecutor, Sandra Chen, had smugly announced to the press that this case was airtight. Perhaps it was the memory of his father's voice. Sometimes the system needs help finding justice, son. His father, Richard Wells, had been a judge for 30 years before dementia claimed his brilliant mind. Now he resided in a care facility, occasionally lucid enough to ask about Marcus's cases. The thought of telling his father he'd lost to Sandra Chen was unbearable. One time, Nora. One time we bend the rules because we know our client is being railroaded. She'd left without agreeing, without disagreeing either. The ambiguity of her silence had been enough for Marcus to proceed. Creating the fabricated email thread had been surprisingly easy. Dated 3 months before the alleged fraud began, they established a conversation between Reed and a non-existent consultant discussing concerns about the CFO's unusual accounting practices, just enough to plant reasonable doubt, just enough to save their case. What Marcus hadn't anticipated was Emma finding the drafts on his laptop. She'd borrowed it to finish a school assignment while visiting for the weekend. He hadn't thought to clear his documents. "What's this?" she'd asked innocently, turning the screen toward him, displaying his drafts of the fabricated emails. The memory of his fumbling explanation still made him wince. He'd watched his daughter's expression transform from confusion to understanding to something like grief. Are you making up evidence, Dad?" He'd closed the laptop too quickly. "No, of course not. It's just a theoretical exercise for teaching the associates." Emma, who'd grown up watching him prepare for trials, who'd helped him rehearse closing arguments in their living room, who'd once told her class her father helped innocent people stay free, had simply stared at him. "Don't lie to me," she'd said quietly. "Not you." Standing in his apartment now, facing his daughter, Marcus felt the full weight of those months of deception. The fabricated emails had worked for a while. Judge Kessler had allowed them into evidence. The prosecution had been forced to contend with this new narrative, suggesting the CFO's culpability. But someone had talked. A junior IT specialist at the firm, perhaps, or maybe Nora herself. Marcus didn't know, and strangely didn't care anymore. The indictment had come yesterday. Evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, potential disbarment. "I came to help you pack," Emma said, breaking the silence. "Mom thinks you should stay with Uncle David until this blows over." Marcus laughed hollowly. "This isn't going to blow over, Em." "Then face it," she said, her voice cracking. "Face it like you taught me to face things. Remember when I wanted to quit piano after I messed up at the recital? You said Wells don't run from their mistakes." His own words thrown back at him like a grenade. The memories surfaced. Emma at 12, tears streaming down her face after hitting wrong notes during her solo. His gentle insistence that she finish the semester, learn from the experience. "This is different," he said weakly. "Why? Because it's you this time? Because you're scared?" Emma's eyes flashed. "I idolized you, Dad. Do you know how that feels? To build your whole idea of right and wrong around someone, and then..." She trailed off, looking around the apartment. At the whiskey glass, the scattered papers, the hidden gun she couldn't see but somehow sensed. "I found your draft emails that day," she continued. "I knew what they were for. I've watched your trials, remember? I know how evidence works. Marcus sank onto the sofa, careful to avoid the hidden weapon. "Why didn't you say something?" "Because I was waiting for you to make it right, to tell the truth, to be the person you raised me to." The phone buzzed again. Another call from Nora. Emma picked it up and held it out to him. "She's been calling me too. She says she has a plan if you'll just talk to her." Marcus stared at the phone, then at his daughter. The impulse that had led him to the gun now seemed distant and foreign, not gone, but separated from him by the simple fact of Emma standing there, waiting for him to be better than he was. He took the phone. The Boston Federal Courthouse loomed against the gray sky, its stone facade a testament to the permanence of justice, or at least the institution of it. Marcus straightened his tie, acutely aware of the cameras tracking his movement up the steps. Nora walked beside him, her hand occasionally touching his, elbow in silent support. "Just like we discussed," she murmured. "No deviations, we only get one shot at this." Behind them, Reed's new legal team, hastily assembled after Wells and Winters had been forced to withdraw, kept a careful distance, as if his disgrace might be contagious. His ex-wife Lisa had surprised him by appearing this morning, standing at the perimeter of the media circus with Emma. The last 3 weeks had been a blur of legal maneuvering. The plan Nora had proposed was audacious and painful, a full confession to Judge Kessler in chambers, cooperation with the prosecutor's investigation, and a public statement today before the hearing. "You're willing to fall on your sword for me?" He'd asked Nora during that first phone call, Emma watching with hopeful eyes. "Not for you," Nora had corrected, "for the firm, for the associates who trusted us, for your daughter." At the top of the courthouse steps, the press crowded closer. Marcus recognized faces, legal correspondents who had once sought his expert commentary, now hungry for his downfall. "Mr. Wells, did you act alone in fabricating evidence?" "Ms. Winters, when did you become aware of the falsified emails?" "Mr. Wells, will you be facing disbarment proceedings?" Nora stepped forward, raising a hand to quiet the shouted questions. "We have a brief statement, after which we will not be taking questions." Marcus moved beside her, the speech they'd prepared burning in his pocket, unused. Looking out at the sea of cameras he suddenly saw beyond them, to Emma watching intently, and to the principles he'd preached to her throughout her life. "I stand before you today not as an attorney, but as a man who has broken the trust placed in him," he began, ignoring Nora's subtle tension beside him. "This wasn't their prepared statement. The allegations against me are true. I fabricated evidence in the Reed case." The crowd's murmuring intensified. Camera shutters clicked rapidly. "I acted alone," he continued, feeling Nora's hand grip his arm. "Nora Winters had no knowledge of my actions until after the evidence was submitted to the court. My partners, my associates, they trusted me to uphold the standards of our profession. I betrayed that trust." He looked directly at Emma now, no longer seeing the cameras. "I have spent my career defending others, often telling myself that the system needed correction, that I was balancing scales that were inherently unbalanced. I was wrong. Justice doesn't need my manipulation. Truth doesn't require my embellishment." His voice grew steadier as he spoke. "I will be entering a guilty plea today. I will accept whatever consequences the court deems appropriate, and I will spend whatever professional life remains to me attempting to restore the trust I have broken." The routine questions erupted again, louder and more frantic. Marcus turned away, following Nora through the courthouse doors into the cool dimness beyond. "That wasn't what we agreed," she said quietly as they walked the marble corridor. "No, it wasn't," he admitted, but it was what Emma needed to hear. 6 hours later, Marcus emerged from Judge Kessler's courtroom. The plea had been entered and accepted. Sentencing would follow in 30 days. His law license was already suspended pending disbarment proceedings. Emma waited on a bench in the hallway, her posture unnaturally straight, hands folded in her lap. Lisa sat beside her, their resemblance striking from this angle. The same determined set to their jaws, the same watchful eyes. "Well," Emma asked as he approached. "Guilty plea accepted. No bail conditions since I'm not considered a flight risk. Sentencing next month. He delivered the information clinically, as if discussing someone else's case. Lisa stood, smoothing her skirt. I'll give you two a minute. She touched Marcus's arm briefly as she passed, the most physical contact they'd had in years. When they were alone, Emma patted the bench beside her. Marcus sat suddenly exhausted. I'm proud of you, she said simply. He laughed, a short, hollow sound. For pleading guilty to a felony. For destroying my career. For becoming exactly the kind of attorney I always railed against. For telling the truth when it was hardest. For choosing the right thing when it hurt. She turned to face him fully. For showing me that people can make terrible mistakes and still find their way back. Marcus felt something crack inside him, not breaking but perhaps opening. I don't know what comes next, Em, I really don't. I do, she said with unexpected certainty. You'll pay whatever penalty they give you. You'll rebuild. Different. Work may be a different life, but an honest one. You make it sound simple. Not simple, just necessary. She leaned against his shoulder, a gesture so familiar it made his throat tighten. Remember when you taught me to swim? How scared I was. He nodded, recalling 5-year-old Emma, trembling at the pool's edge. You said the water would hold me up if I trusted it, if I stopped fighting it. She looked up at him. The truth is like that, I think. It holds you up, but only if you stop fighting it. Over her head, Marcus saw Nora deep in conversation with Sandra Chen, the prosecutor. Their animated gestures suggested negotiation, perhaps over his sentencing recommendations. Beyond them, through the courthouse windows, life in Boston continued. Pedestrians hurrying past, clouds shifting overhead. The weight of the gun against his temple seemed like a memory from another lifetime now. The choice to end things had been replaced by something harder, more demanding. The choice to continue, to repair, to live with the consequences of his actions. Stay with me tonight, he asked his daughter. We could order that terrible pizza. Do you like? Emma smiled, the expression transforming her face, making her look younger and older simultaneously. With pineapple. Even with pineapple, he conceded, standing and offering her his hand. Outside, the reporters waited. The cameras would capture their exit. Questions would be shouted. But for this moment, in this marble hallway with his daughter's hand in, his Marcus Wells felt something unexpected. Not redemption, not yet, but its distant possibility. The weight of silence had been lifted. What remained was the harder, cleaner burden of truth. Character count, 12,807.